Hello and welcome to the shed. My name is Marissa and I'm a machine knitter. And in this tutorial, number 2, I'm going to teach you how to cast on. I'm going to teach you 2 techniques, one of which is called easy cast on and the other is Erupt cast on. Now, if you followed my first tutorial, you should have your machine ready, set up on the table and 2 yarns threaded up through the tension mast and perhaps a 3rd yarn on the floor ready to use as our waste yarn. Now, all of my tutorials I will probably use the Knitmaster for, but don't panic. If you have a brother, my 3rd tutorial is going to be brother knitting machine parts explained. So whenever I use my machine, you'll be able to easily know what part I'm referring to on a brother machine also. Anyway, if you have everything ready, we should be able to make a start. Okay, so we are sat at the machine now and the yarns are thread up. There we go. So if we just take one of our yarns and pop it into hole number 1 by opening the gate, popping it in, and you can either wind it around the clamp or you could just tie it to the table leg for now. And we take our needle selector and I'm going to knit on 40 needles. So on this machine it's 2 to 2. What I've done there is I've pushed all of the needles forward into D position. Now for easy cast on, I am going to push back every other needle all the way back to A position so that I'm left with every other needle. On the carriage, I've selected tension 3 because I already know that that is correct for this yarn that I'm using. If you don't know, because you've not done it before, like I said, I think in the first tutorial, if you just leave it on 5 and then see what happens. So now I'm going to take the carriage across and you can see that it's knit. It's picked the yarn up on every other needle. And at this point, I'm going to take the cast on comb and I'm going to hook it over the front to catch all of those bottom stitches. And in order to do that, I just need to make sure that the yarn attached to the carriage now is going to be at the front of this comb. So I'm going to make sure that it's centered up and I'm going to just pull that forward and put the comb on at the front, grab all of those stitches and give it a good pull down. So I've caught them, they're all pulled down, and this yarn is at the front. Now what's a good idea is to put a weight on in the center, and then I'm going to use my needle selector to bring the needles that were in A position, the ones that were right at the back, I've just pushed them forward slightly into B position so that they're in line with the others. So you can see that they're all at the edge of the machine now. And I'm going to take the carriage about an inch or so away from the last working needle, and I'm going to go up to the mast and just give it a good tug so that the tension's going to be right. And as I do the second row, I gently pull down just to help it along a bit. And we're knitting. So what I would like to make you aware of is that if you go too far to the end of the machine, then the slack that the mast needs to take up is quite a lot. And what can happen is you'll get loops at the sides. So really try to only go an inch or two past each working needle at the edges, which looks a bit like this. The temptation as well is to go quite quickly, but that's when you sort of miss a mistake. So you learn not to go too fast, because then you could find a mistake sort of 60 rows down and have to start again. So just take your time. And that's what the easy cast on edge will look like. It's not something that you would ever see on a garment, because it's unsecured and a bit messy. But it gets us knitting. And as I said before, it means that we can now change on to our main yarn. So what I'm going to do is I'll break the yarn in between the carriage and the tension mast, and I'll put it back on that handy bar. I'll take the other yarn and I will put that again in hole number 1, shut the gate, wind it round the clamp of the table or tie it to the table leg, and then do another row. So the bit that I've tied to the table leg, after I've done a few rows, I can snip that off with scissors, or if your yarn is forgiving, you can just pull it away. And I take the weights off, and you can see that I've got 2 colours there. Now for the purposes of the tutorial, the white yarn here, the sort of ecru colour, that was my waste yarn. So you can clearly see that there's the bottom of these nice blue yarn stitches, and the blue yarn is our main yarn. So I could carry on knitting now, finish off, and I would have stitches that I'd be able to pick up at a later time. And that's as easy cast on is. I will do a tutorial on edges and trims, which will explain exactly what we would do with these. But for now, you are knitting at least. And the next tutorial is of this section is going to be the Erupt cast on. So we can take this bit off now. It's a fun bit. No one can ever believe we do, but now you can just pull away or break the yarn, the main yarn, secure it to the mast again, and take that one away from underneath the machine so there's nothing entangled anywhere. I'm going to hold our sample with one hand and take the carriage across with the other. So essentially I've just knitted an empty row, but that's then released our little sample. Ready to do the next one. So this next sample is our Erupt cast on, and I've just taken our main yarn, which was my blue one, and I'm going to put it in hole number 1 again, and instead of tying it to the table this time, I'm going to make a slip knot. Make a little slip knot, And with that slip knot, I'm going to be putting it on the last working needle, but it's the one that's furthest away from the carriage. So it's not this one, it's this one. But before I do that, I need to push all of the needles out that I'm going to be working on. So my 40 needle sample here, all the way to the front to deposition. And I put the loop on that end one, and I just tighten it up to something similar to the stitch size that we'd be using. So nothing really tight and don't have it baggy either, so somewhere in the middle. And then Erupt cast on is called such because it sort of mimics an E shape, but what we're really doing is we're just wrapping the yarn around each needle. So I'm using my hands as tension tools at the moment. So I've got the loose end in one hand, and then I've got the end which is sort of threaded up to the tension mast in the other. And I'm going through the gap, so I'm going either side of the next needle. So on this one, I'm just going over that end one, and then I'm pushing it back with my finger. So if I show you again, I'm going in between the needles and back over. So in between there, and then tightening up. Now the temptation is to do it quite tight. So try and use your finger at the back here too as a tensioner, so that they're not too tight. So go in between the needles, and you would do this for the entire length of the sample. Now just for the last two, I'm going to show you slowly again. Okay, so ignore the latches on the needles, they just do their own thing. So we're going to be going over and then pushing back. So in between, pushing back. And the last one. Okay, so the yarn underneath here, as long as it's not tangled up with those brushes underneath the carriage and it's running freely, that's great. And remember just to give it a bit of a tug at the mast to tighten everything up. And we can do one row here. And after we've done one row, we want to put on the cast on comb again. So just like I said before, we center it up and we make sure that we don't catch the edge bit. So pull it out a bit, center it up, pop it over the top and pull quite firmly down so that you're catching all of those stitches. As I go along, I always tidy up so you can see where you are. Put the weight on, and we're away. Let's take off the comb and the weight and have a look at that nice edge. It does tend to roll a bit, but we haven't ironed it or washed it yet, so it doesn't roll as much after you do those things. But it's, as you can see, it's a nice secured edge. Now it rolls away from you, so it's hard to see at the moment, because when you knit on a knitting machine, you're always looking at the back of the knitting. The front is actually on the other side. So sometimes it's useful to actually get out of your chair, go round to the front and have a little look at what you've done, especially when you've done Fair Isle, because you can't see from the back. But anyway, that's your Erupt cast on edge. So you could continue to knit now and experiment with using the tension dial and maybe change some yarns.